This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, brought to you by the Leer Jerusalem Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. If you like us, please join our community of supporters by giving to our Patreon campaign. You'll find it on our homepage. I am Gilad Halpern, and every week my co-host Dalia Shendlin and I talk about books and research and other things that have caught our attention. Dalia is away this week, and it is therefore my pleasure, and mine alone, to welcome Professor Avishai Margalit to the show. He is Professor Emeritus of Philosophy at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, George Kinnan, a professor at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Princeton, as well as a research fellow at the Leer Institute. His most recent book, On Betrayal, was published by Harvard University Press in 2017. Professor Margalit, welcome to the show.
Welcome.
So in the book you pose a rhetorical question: why does betrayal deserve a philosophical inquiry of this breadth? And you also answer: every human phenomenon deserves the attention of a philosopher. It makes perfect sense, but I'd like to push you a little further on that. Why were you drawn to betrayal in particular?
Well, for one thing, is autobiographical, and I tell two stories of betrayal. One comes from my childhood experience during the Independence War here in 1948, and when Jerusalem was under siege and someone was accused of betraying the people, namely us, being under siege, handing over a map of sensitive places in Jerusalem while we were shelled. And then this person was executed as a traitor. And later on, the whole thing was revised when his wife basically challenged the kangaroo court that was basically administered to him. And another was a childhood hero of mine from my neighborhood, who was a commander in an elite unit, and where this unit was caught in Syria and tortured. And one of them was committed suicide in jail in Syria. And when his body came back to Israel, there was a message from him: I didn't betray, which by implication meant that the others did. And one of them was my childhood hero. And it turned out that actually and at the beginning when they came back, he was discharged and sort of disgraced. And it turned out that actually he was a hero. And the story was far more complicated. So those were the heroic days when traitors and betrayal were part of the way we talked about life. And then I felt that talking about liberal democracies, or the sort of the world which is well-fed, that we lost. Those words, traitor and betrayal, lost their grip. And I started thinking about whether those words still have a hold on us or not, and if, in what sense. So that was, in a way, something that triggered me as a way of discovering or dealing with betrayal as the contrast to fraternity. Namely, if the revolutionary triangle, liberty, equality, fraternity, and the basic three ideas that compose modern political philosophy, obviously the a great deal of thought was and is dedicated to equality and liberty and how to negotiate the relation between the two. And this is usually what we take as the theory of justice, namely how to hit the right balance between liberty and equality. The question was, what fraternity? Is it just a sentimental moral kitsch, something, or is there something important in fraternity? But I adopt a strategy of negative politics, namely deal with the bad things first, and then see what the other side looks like.
Never fails.
Namely, like in medicine, you deal with the illnesses, not with health. And the reason is that I think that moral urgency, at least if not importance, comes from the fact that we protest against inequality more than driven to equality. Injustice is what drives us mad into ethics and not justice. So I thought that betrayal is a good thing. And if I can add something, in a way, when I ask why betrayal, one of the retort can be, why not? Because betrayal seems to be a basic human plot. And I mention in the book a story that a friend once told me about what used to be Ceylon at the time, when people were queuing for, when the sort of movies, you paid 1 rupiah for a movie, the movies went forever, not edited, nothing. No one even bothered giving them names. But there were 2 plots. One was love and one was war. And I said that for 1 rupiah I can even do better and use betrayal, because most of the stories about love are about love betrayed, and war definitely is well connected to betrayal.
Because you look at the concept of betrayal from several aspects, from the collective to the most personal, and you define it as undermining thick human relations. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes. I think that our relation of most of us to the world consists of 2 types of relations. One is to the near and dear, as it were, to family, friends, as a model of those relations that we usually care most about. And then an attitude towards strangers or anonymous or people in general, just in virtue of them being human. I mean, just being human, we can consider also state of human existence, like being ill or being crippled or whatever. But the main trait is the humanity, namely their being human being. And in thick relation, we extend the model of thick relation, namely which has history to it and depth to it, from family and friends, we extend it to larger communities. It can be clan, tribe, nation, ethnic group, and so on. And my claim is that betrayal has mostly to do with thick relation. And I make a distinction between ethics and morality. I'm not the first to use this couple, one from a Greek source and one from the Latin source, which basically meant the same, but to use them from the division of labor point of view, to what I call ethics, which deals with regulate our thick relation, and morality our thin relation. And I don't take ethics, namely thick relation, as just special cases of morality. I think it has I'll call it logic of its own, or justification of its own, or sensibility of its own. And so betrayal is an ethical notion and not a moral issue. Then in betrayal, there may be moral issues involved, like cheating, namely things that lying, cheating, and things that are instruments of betrayal, but not necessarily instruments of betrayal. But the main thing is that betrayal, you betray thick relations. That's the idea.
And thick relations are relations that are based on what? On history, on tradition, on any sort of
first of all, on
values?
No, they actually the source of many of the things that you just described. The main thing is that, family is simply the closeness, and being raised in a family and with friends the main thing is that you start with the idea is to start with a relation and not with attributes or good features that make the relations. You start, the relation is the basic, and the thickness comes from endowing the relations with history, with shared memories, with shared concern, with basically being part of a community of memory, for example, is such an element. So, and I think that there is a great deal of talk about the primacy of ethnic group in the case of nation states and so on. I think that the basic idea is belonging to a community of memory. And from that, there are political and institutional implications. But the main thing is, and I dealt with the community of memory in a book that I wrote about the ethics of memory. So that's the relation.
I'd like to spend a bit more time on the distinction between ethics and morality, by way of discussing also the thin and thick relations. Can something flow between them? I mean, is there, to what extent do they overlap and one can transition from the other? Because that really, it serves to define the contours and to demarcate what betrayal amounts to.
Well, I think that all historical notions, like betrayal and so on, usually are subjected to all sorts of, they are never well defined, almost by definition. Namely, by definition, you can get well-defined concept only in ahistorical discourse, like mathematics or physics and so on. And in non-historical, but all things that gain depth, by gaining historical depth, you also gain confusion and cases and in-between cases. The issue is not to deal demarcation namely on the boundaries of the two, where exactly the boundaries goes, but about the clear cases. Are there clear cases of, let's say, of loyalty and good and clear cases of betrayal, rather than where exactly we cross the line from one to the other? And I think that the way to deal with this kind of concept is really to stick mainly to the paradigm cases rather than to the blurry cases of the in-between. Either in terms... Now, in the case of betrayal, for example, this is particularly problematic because betrayal seems like what used to be called, or still can be called, essentially contested concepts. Like we now, for example, one of the most glaring example is terrorism. So terrorists, we think that this concept goes, it's a bad word, terrorist, and you want your enemy to be a terrorist and you are a patriot, and vice versa. They want you to be a terrorist and you are. So it's part of a propaganda machinery, those concepts, and it looks as if they have no cash value. The point is whether betrayal is of that kind, whether it is merely an essentially contested term, and there is nothing interesting to say about it apart from I'm a patriot and you are a terrorist, and I am a loyalist and you are a betrayer. So the issue is whether there is, and I try to argue, yes, that there is something to say for it.
Yeah, but also the different cases that you discuss yield very different insights into that very question. Say adultery as opposed to apostasy, right? Betraying your partner as opposed to betraying your religion or religious culture. And that also ties into what you said earlier, and you also explore in the book, about how the concept lost its grip in the modern liberal culture, because to an extent we are encouraged to betray, to ask questions, to doubt, to cast doubt on the things that we take as loyalty. And how do the different concepts shed different light on this question?
That's a very good question. There are two things. One is, I faced a paradox. On the one hand, the feeling is that betrayal is a shifting dune, and it moves all the time, and there is nothing stable, and the concept is not stable. On the other hand, you read the Bible, and you readily understand all the plots about betrayal there. Or you read Greek tragedies, and you know right away who is a betrayer, and you understand it. Yeah, then people will say you need more of the context and more of, and how do you know that you know? Forget about how do you know that you know and all this. We know that we understand. Not all of it, maybe there are some elements that we don't, but basically, so how to account for the fact that on the one hand, the concept looks resilient and stable throughout the geographic differences and historical differences, and on the other hand, the feeling, as you said, it's in a culture of doubt. Suddenly, betrayal, like many other things, loses its hold. So that's one thing. And you quite rightly pointed out there are various forms or main headlines, placeholders for betrayal. One is a political betrayal, that's treason. And one is religious betrayal that can go in two forms. Either idolatry, namely betraying God, whoring after strange gods, or betraying the religious community, and that's apostasy. And then, of course, in personal relation, the paradigmatic case is in marital life, adultery. Now, of course, family changes. Families throughout the years change many of its features, and all the concepts were subjected to historical changes. And yet, when all is said and done, we still understand the hold of it. So, adultery, there is a change in attitude. Adultery is not criminalized anymore. Apostasy is a human rights by the Declaration of the Human Rights. You can change your religion and not all the world accept it, and in many places in the world you can pay with your life for apostasy and for adultery. But if the political setup that we concentrated here, which vaguely is what is called liberal democracies or something akin to it, if this is there you see that there was a change in the attitude to adultery, to apostasy, and so on. Yeah.
Is it because there's also been a change in understanding of what conscience is? Because, for example, as some would like to label others as terrorists, some political traitors would like to label themselves as conscientious objectors, right? Depending on the context. But I don't think there's anyone who ever cheated on his partner or her partner who labeled himself or herself as a conscientious cheater, right? It's not a question of worldview, of conscience, of what's right and wrong, of justice, but rather something that is, I don't know, more, has to do with their own personal preferences, and therefore it's more loaded. Adultery is more loaded and more and judged with a harsher judgment value than the other forms are.
That's interesting. In the case, I think that the story that people tell themselves when they betray, right, can be, vary greatly. Many of the people who betrayed the atomic secrets of America, sort of the famous spies, not the famous traitors, as they were called, Klaus Fuchs, and then they said that the idea is to save humanity by creating a balance of power between the two, and they served the great humanity rather than the American capitalist system. And then the others say that they don't feel any loyalty to the government or to but to the working class or to humanity at large. So they can, what you say, it's true that you can tell yourself. Now the point is, can an adulterer tell a story to himself or to herself, which is, I did it for a higher good? Hard but not impossible. Yes, I needed this variety in order to enhance the intensity of our love and not be bogged down and be bored by conventional marriage. And then it should be more of an open marriage. I know that it's hard for some people to accept, but I think it's wrong. And so you have, what you said, the stories which sometimes come from a genuine recognition, sometimes are just crude rationalization, and sometimes are self-deception. Yeah, all of them, you find it all.
I want to go back to the issue of the liberal conscience and how we, the culture of doubt. Do you think that judgment is a facilitator of betrayal? Is there a direct link between them?
We are talking about whether critical thinking, namely subjecting cherished assumption, unchallenged assumption in a community you live in, especially traditional, when the whole idea of traditional is not challenging basic assumption, whether critical thinking is the first step to be more alienated from that and ending up in a slippery slope, ending up as a betrayer, half betrayer, as an outcast, whatever is the term. So there are two issues. One, whether it's empirically true, whether this is historically speaking. No, people betray for lots of things, especially political betrayal is they betray for money, for sex, or for ideology. So they do it for whether the culture of skepticism that comes with critical thinking undermines those cozy notions of what it is to belong and what it whether this creates a sort of a climate where opposition or vehement opposition is more popular. Yes, I believe that it's true. Yes. We have to judge it case by case on a retail basis, not on a wholesale basis. But if you ask me just to shoot from my hip and say, I would say, yes, there is something to it, yes.
Right. Okay, this is all we have time for today. So Professor Avishai Margalit, a philosopher and a senior research fellow at the Leer Institute, thank you very much for joining us today for this discussion about your most recent book, On Betrayal, that was published in 2017 by Harvard University Press. Thank you very much. And many thanks to Gizem Ozdemir, our sound engineer, and to Itai Shelem and Georgia Foscarini, our producers, as well as the Leer Institute for their generous support. And now we've got a little request for you. Many or most of you listen to us on the Apple Podcast app, and we would like to ask you to please consider writing us a review. All you have to do is launch the app, select our podcast in the library section, scroll down to ratings and review, and then press write a review, and then of course write one. Also, you can support us by going to our website, that's tlv1.fm/Tel Aviv Review, and subscribing onto our Patreon campaign. Check out our archive, it has more than 500 interviews. And if you like what we do here, you can also like us on Facebook. Our page is called the Tel Aviv Review Podcast, Ideas from Israel, and follow me and Dalia on Twitter. Join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review, and until then, goodbye.